Hello and welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez. Today, in a moment, the UN's top humanitarian official talks to us about the crisis in Yemen, the worst he's seen, and the painstaking efforts to put in place a truce in the port of Hodeidah. Also today, we'll have the latest on a rescue effort in northeast India to free a group of 15 miners trapped underground.
This is one of the very complex and complicated type of rescue operations, since we do not have even the maps and the blueprints of the mining, and we even do not know the directions in which the laborers being trapped. Another big challenge that we are facing, the overflooded mine. We are unable to pull out all the water.
That's in just under 20 minutes' time. And later, well, that piece of music means to one of the BBC's veteran correspondents who reported from Sarajevo in the 1990s. That's in the second half of the programme. But we are going to start today in Yemen, a country ravaged by 3.5 years of war that's left thousands of people dead and millions in desperate need of help. But although the prospects for Yemen as 2018 draws to a close remain extremely bleak, there are small glimmers of hope that next year may see some improvement. Finally, a process to start talking about peace is underway again. There'll be more meetings in January, and signs that a truce in the fighting over the port of Hodeidah may be starting to hold. But of course, hope is relative, and Yemen remains the world's worst humanitarian disaster. The man whose job it is to try and ease the suffering is Mark Lowcock, who's the UN's Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs. When he came into the NewsHour studio, I asked him first for an update on the situation in Hodeidah.
What we've seen since the 18th of December is a gradual reduction in the hostilities. The airstrikes have ended in and around Hodeidah, which is what was agreed at Stockholm and at the Security Council resolution of the 21st of December. It's been gradual, the reduction in fighting. But what my colleagues in Hodeidah are reporting yesterday and today is quite good progress, actually, in reducing the level of hostilities, a bit more freedom of movement for ordinary people in the city, and a good meeting yesterday facilitated by the head of the UN monitoring mission, General Kammert, Dutch general, who's leading our team there. And then another good meeting today to start to get the parties to work out the detail of how they will fulfill their promise to pull their forces back from Hodeidah and allow the port to operate properly and the mill, and us to get into the mills and the roads to operate and so on. So baby steps, but in the right direction.
And we often say that Hodeidah is crucial to the supply of humanitarian aid. How crucial is it?
Yemen produces very little of its own food. About 10% probably of the food eaten is produced in the country. That means it all has to be imported. Most of the people of Yemen are in Houthi-controlled areas for which the only decent access is from those Red Sea ports. So Hodeidah, overwhelmingly the most important port, probably 70% of food coming in through there.
And yet the situation is extremely grave. We often use this phrase, the world's worst humanitarian disaster. From what you've witnessed, what does that look like?
Well, I use that phrase and I mean two things by it. Firstly, I mean there are more people in Yemen in the catastrophe phase, which is tantamount to famine. These are people slowly or quickly dying, than in any other place in the world. There's 250,000 people in that situation, 10 times as many in the only other place where those conditions exist, which is South Sudan. But the second thing I mean is that there are more people in need of humanitarian assistance of one sort or another in Yemen than in any other country. Probably we project next year something like 24 million people will be in need of some sort of assistance. That's nearly twice the level of any other country. So there's two experiences actually that I still think about a lot in the, late at night where I'm worrying away about what I've seen and what we need to do about it. The first is I met a group of people in a so-called internally displaced people's camp north of Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, who'd fled a few weeks ago from Hodeidah because of the fighting there. And those people had absolutely nothing under a plastic sheet. They were hungry, they were desperate, they were terrified of airstrikes. And I see lots of desperate people in the course of my job, and those people were in a very, very bad state, and they need a lot of help, and we're trying to help them. The other is meeting children and their parents literally starving to death, which I did in hospitals in Aden, and health workers doing heroic work to try to save little babies. And you've all seen the pictures on the TV screen or in your newspapers. You never get used to those. And I remember a little baby called Faisal, whose mother had been in the hospital in Aden with him for a few weeks, and every now and then he'd improve a bit and they'd take him home, and then he'd deteriorate again and they'd bring him back in, and that was happening 3 or 4 times. And what I'm aware of as I meet parents of children like that is, in a way, they're the lucky ones, because they're the ones who've got to the hospital. There are countless numbers just like little Faisal who we never see and whose stories we never hear, but who never make it.
And how quickly could those people's situation be reversed if the fighting stopped?
Well, it would take years to rebuild the destroyed roads and bridges.
But in terms of the immediate sort of emergence...
In terms of the immediate, if we had better access, and as long as we keep being well funded on our appeal and the parties comply with their obligations, we can certainly keep the vast majority of people alive and ease the levels of starvation and so on. But that's just the beginning. The real question is, how does Yemen get onto a path of recovery? And it'll take years to rebuild the infrastructure, probably decades to create an economy where people can earn a living. But the big long-term challenge is dealing with all the grievances and the anger that this horrible war has created. And that is the job of generations.
Is it going to be possible? Does Yemen have a future as a state as we understand it now, do you think?
Yes. There's no reason why the country can't recover from this. They'll need a political system which allows everybody's voice to be heard, and it's a country of multiple tribes and groups. They'll need an economy which enables people to make a living and for them to find their way in the world, and in particular they'll need export earnings if they're not going to produce enough of their own food. And they'll need patience and support for a very long time from the international community, but above all from their neighbours.
Is there the will to end this, do you think, from the main parties to the conflict? Because that's what always needs to happen, doesn't it, for a war to end? Either people are exhausted or there has to be some reason why they don't want to continue. Do those conditions exist?
All wars end eventually is the lesson of history, and we do see the signs that the parties are willing to come to the table and take serious steps. That's what we saw in Stockholm. It's what we started to see in the way Stockholm is being implemented now in the talks in Hodeidah yesterday and today. Martin Griffiths, the UN political envoy, will bring the parties together again next month, and we will see. This is going to be a step-by-step process. It's going to take a long time. But at the moment, the signals are that people do want to move things forward.
Including the US? It's been said that the US could end this war right now if it wanted to.
The US is one of the biggest financiers of humanitarian assistance. I think President Trump was quoted the other day as saying that he would like to see the situation improve. But there are multiple parties. Everybody's going to have to play their part. And at the end of the day, the people with the biggest voices, the most important voices, will be the Yemeni groups themselves.
Is your glass half full or half empty as this year draws to a close? And it's been a terrible year for Yemen.
It's been a terrible year in Yemen, a really terrible year. And the glass was nearly empty. But there are a few more drops in it now, but there's a long, long way to go.
That was Mark Lowcock, the UN's Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. Well, the war in Yemen is not just one conflict, but a patchwork of different conflicts, each with their own local dynamic. One of the other main actors is the Yemeni branch of Al-Qaeda, something that the latest in our series of personal stories from Yemen touches on. Irene Omar lives in Mukalla, the capital of Hadramaut province, in the east of the country.
The life in Hadramaut now in Mukalla is so quiet. It's nice. It's on the Arabian Sea. Hadramaut is so beautiful. I live with my family. I have one sister. She's older than me and she's a lawyer. I like spending time with my friends when we go to the parks. Sometimes we are getting crazy and going to the beach. But it wasn't always like that. In 2014, Mukalla fell under the control of Al-Qaeda. This situation and the life in general in Mukalla became so bad, especially for us as women. They were controlling our lives in work, the schools, university. It was impossible for us to go outside. Even if you are two girls or something, it's still insecure for us. It's still unsafe. This ideology is so new for us. So we felt like we are in Taliban, like in Afghanistan or something. We felt like our future would be like this. All of us as women were under a lot of psychological pressure, and a lot of women are still suffering mental health problems until now. The idea of establishing a foundation concentrating on peace journalism and investigative journalism, it was my dream or my passion. I put the idea with 3 of my friends, 2 boys and 1 girl. We established that foundation and we are working on it now. We need awareness to make the people know more about the good sides in Yemen. Yemen is not just a country of war, no. I don't believe that the peace talks will help Yemen getting out of this problem, because the war in Yemen is like a business for some people. For their own interest, they want this war to last forever. For 2019, I wish the impossible peace for Yemen. I wish for my family and also for me and my friends and for all the Yemeni people to live in peace.
That was Irene Omar from Mukalla in the east of Yemen, and you can hear the final one in our series for 5 women living in different cities across Yemen. That'll be on tomorrow's edition of NewsHour. And of course, if you want more background on the conflict in Yemen, how it started, what's happening at the moment, it's all on our website, bbc.com/news. This is NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Do stay with us. Still to come on the programme, the security forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo have clashed with protesters angry at a further delay in the presidential election in some areas. We'll be hearing more on that, and also the extraordinary logistics involved in delivering ballot boxes to remote parts of the country that will be voting on Sunday.
Big boxes are now being unloaded from an army truck and carried onto a small, slightly run-down boat. In front of us, the Congo River, along which dozens of fishing villages built on stilts are still waiting to receive these boxes. Inside, election results tallying sheets, but also solar panels, motorbikes, sat phones. It'll take them about a day to reach their destination of Basankusu.
More on that in about 15 minutes. One other headline, the US Senate's adjourned without taking action to address the continuing government shutdown triggered by a row over President Trump's planned border wall. This is James Menendez with NewsHour live from the BBC. Let's turn to Saudi Arabia now, still reeling from the shockwaves that reverberated from the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. There's been a shuffling of the deck in the upper echelons of the government. King Salman has sacked the man who became the face and voice on Western media in the wake of the killing, the Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir, who's been demoted to a more junior role. The King's also made a number of other changes. I've been speaking to our defence and security correspondent Frank Gardner, who knows the kingdom well. First of all, how significant is this reshuffle?
It is quite significant because it's the first big reshuffle at cabinet level since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul in the Saudi consulate on October the 2nd. The reverberations from that murder, from that scandal, are still bouncing around the Saudi kingdom. And this was under the orders of King Salman, the king, who is all-powerful in that country. And I suppose, in a way, it was probably expected that Adel Jubeir, the foreign minister, was probably sooner or later going to be out. He's a non-royal. He is a hangover from the era of the previous king, King Abdullah. He's been in this post for 3.5 years. And some would say, I think, that he is possibly being used as a bit of a scapegoat here. He was the first senior member of the Saudi government to admit that Khashoggi had been murdered. He called it a mistake, blamed it on a rogue operation. I was in Bahrain watching his media appearance when he lashed out at the international media for what he called hysteria over this killing, which I think was perhaps rather unfortunate, given that hysteria was very much justified over this. He's not out of the government altogether. He's a minister of state now, but it is a demotion. And the man who's going to take his place, Ibrahim al-Asif, I knew him when he was at SAMA, the Saudi Arabian military agency. He's a financier. He's got very little experience in foreign affairs, whereas Adel Jubeir is a diplomat and was a very, very good one. He was extremely smooth. He was previously ambassador in Washington. And I think, he's probably served his country well. But to some extent, I think this is a cosmetic reshuffle so that they are seen to be doing something to put their house in order after this disastrous hit on a journalist on Saudi government property.
Is there anything in the reshuffle that might suggest this is King Salman asserting his primacy over the Crown Prince?
No, I don't think so. They act very much in concert. The Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as he's known as, is very much the favourite son of King Salman. He's been seen with him in the last few weeks touring the northern provinces. So there's no question of King Salman distancing himself from his son, MBS. That said, he has ordered a restructuring of the intelligence and security apparatus, but he's put his son in charge of that. So if you hold the belief, as many in the West do, that MBS was in some way responsible for the murder of Khashoggi, then you could say that this is putting the fox in charge of the hen coop. But it's going to take them a while to get over this. And I think it's going to be a very long time before Western leaders are happy to be photographed shaking hands and smiling with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
So I was going to ask, how much concern is there still in Riyadh about those fraying ties with the US, particularly, with many members of Congress expressing grave doubts about the relationship? Is the expectation that they just have to ride this one out and ultimately, in time, those business ties will trump everything else?
I think there's certainly an element of that. In the days immediately after the murder of Khashoggi, there was, I think, something approaching complacency in the Crown Prince's inner circle, where the attitude was one of, don't worry, we've got this, we've got top cover. President Trump's our ally, he's going to make sure we'll be okay. And they completely underestimated the Western abhorrence, the horror at what had happened, particularly the gruesome nature of this murder, of his body being hacked into pieces and dissolved in acid, reportedly, and poured away down a drain. This is medieval, it's barbaric. It's not what, sovereign nations are supposed to do. It's been a real shock, and I think a wake-up call to a lot of people in the West, that although Crown Prince MBS is a reformer, he is certainly no Democrat. He may be allowing the Black Eyed Peas and David Guetta to perform in Riyadh and to allow women to drive and all sorts of new social freedoms. Don't even think about political freedom. There is no freedom of expression in Saudi Arabia.
Frank Gardner there, our defence and security correspondent. Mining remains an extremely dangerous business in many parts of the world. In a remote corner of northeast India, 15 workers remain trapped inside an illegal mine. A rescue operation is underway, but it's proving extremely difficult because of a lack of resources and a lack of information about the mines. After 2 weeks underground, hopes of finding anyone alive are now fading fast. Davina Gupta reports from the rescue site in the state of Meghalaya.
It's a scene of utter confusion. Rescue workers dressed in orange suits are standing on top of piles of coal. They're trying to reach over to a dozen miners trapped in a 300 feet deep underground coal mine. What's making it more difficult is that the water that flooded the mine is still at the same level. They're trying to pump out this water, and so far only several broken helmets have been removed. The coal miners, all in their early 20s, are believed to be trapped in what is called a rat hole mine. It's a narrow pit dug on the side of a hill, which leads to small horizontal tunnels inside. The space is so small that workers have to lie on their back to pass through to reach a coal seam. These rat hole mines are illegal and have been banned since 2014 after high pollution levels started contaminating the rivers here. But the practice of extracting coal from them is still widespread. A crane is now being used to carry expert divers inside the flooded mine. The rescue team in charge, Santosh Kumar Singh, tells me there are at least 100 such underground pits in the area, and they could be interconnected.
This is one of the very complex and complicated type of rescue operations, since we do not have even the maps and the blueprints of the mining, and we even do not know the directions in which the laborers being trapped. Another big challenge that we are facing, the over-flooded mine, we are unable to pull out all the water.
A few kilometers away on a mountain top is the village of Lumthari. In a small white church, a group is praying for the trapped miners. One of the miners, 20-year-old Shabad Dhar, wanted to earn money at a coal mine to contribute at the church service on Christmas here. His mother is inconsolable. She covers her face with her hands when I ask about her son. Her last memory is of trying to stop him from working in a coal mine.
I stopped him, but he won't listen. I don't know what to feel anymore. My husband told me after 7 days. I couldn't even go to search for my son.
Back at the flooded mine, the rescue operations are ending for the day. I spot the head of the district, FM Doff, sitting under a makeshift tent.
To ban mining because the livelihood of people here, but at the same time, mining should be done. It should be regulated so that people also have got a livelihood. But I say it should be in a scientific way and regulated way so that environment is not affected, people's lives are not affected.
He tells me the state government is now fighting in the court to legalize coal mining so that workers can be given more rights and minimum wages. But for now, hope is fast getting buried in the flooded coal pit.
Davina Gupta reporting there from the state of Meghalaya in India. You're listening to News Hour from the BBC. Do stay with us. A lot more to come in the next half hour of the programme. Don't go away. Welcome back to News Hour. Now, 2018 in Brazil began with a big question. Who will be the next president? Jair Bolsonaro was far from the favourite in the first half of the year, but he'll be sworn in as president on January the 1st of next year. The presidential campaign had many twists and turns. One of Bolsonaro's main opponents was arrested in April, and the incoming president was stabbed while campaigning back in September. The BBC's Julia Carneiro reflects now on what it's been like to cover that election and the other major stories in Latin America's biggest country.
The elections pitted the left against the right, and friends and families took sides. I saw couples, cousins, school friends fight bitterly and sometimes stop talking to each other. The WhatsApp messaging app became a battleground for fake news. Bolsonaro ended up being elected with big support from groups like farmers, evangelical churches, and lorry drivers who held a massive strike in May. They blocked crucial roads and highways. I spoke to some of the strikers outside Rio's main refinery belonging to oil giant Petrobras. Day and night, the drivers were blocking the gate and preventing fuel trucks from filling up, cutting off supply to gas stations across the city. This generated chaos, with empty shelves in supermarkets and airports canceling flights. But people drove by honking their horns to show their support, and some even left food for the lorry drivers. They received solidarity because of Brazil's economic crisis, which is deepening inequality and raising poverty levels. This is very visible in my home city, Rio. There are more people begging and a lot more people, sometimes entire families, living on the streets. Over a quarter of Brazil's population live in poverty, and the number is on the rise. Violent crime is escalating too, and this is very palpable, especially for residents of favelas and areas dominated by criminal gangs. Violence and politics crossed paths in March when Marielle Franco was murdered in Rio, shot dead inside her car. She was a young city councillor, a black woman who had grown up in a favela in Rio and stood up for the rights of the least privileged.
You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories. A huge fire engulfs one of the biggest and most important art collections in Latin America. Firefighters are still
when
struggling
the National
to bring
Museum,
the
Brazil's
blaze under
oldest
control.
culture and
Brazil's
science
National
institution, was destroyed by fire, it felt symbolic. It had 20 million artifacts and precious collections of natural history and anthropology. Most of it went up in flames. Firefighters were criticized for their slow response, and water hydrants failed to work. At the scene, people around me were asking, if Brazil can't even take care of its past, how is it going to build a better future?
And that was the BBC's Brazil correspondent Julia Carneiro taking a look back at 2018 there. This is the BBC in London. You're listening to NewsHour with James Menendez. The election in the Democratic Republic of Congo is just 3 days away. That's 2 years after it was meant to take place, and there's already been another week's delay because of a fire that destroyed thousands of voting machines. And now the Election Commission has said that some parts of the east of this vast country won't get to vote on Sunday. More than 1 million people will have to wait another 3 months to cast their ballots. The official version is that it's because of the Ebola outbreak and insecurity, but many fear it's a way to rig the result, as the part of the country affected is an opposition stronghold. Well, today there have been clashes between protesters and security forces. We'll have more details on those in a moment. But first to the challenge of organising an election in a country the size of Western Europe, and one in which most people live in terrible poverty. The BBC's Louise de Wast reports now from Equateur province in the northwest.
The Electoral Commission is racing to equip more than 75,000 polling stations across this vast country. They are already a week late. Here in the city of Bandaka, in the equatorial rainforest, the challenges are immense.
Big boxes are now being unloaded from an army truck and carried onto a small, slightly run-down boat. In front of us, the Congo River, along which dozens of fishing villages built on stilts are still waiting to receive these boxes. Inside, election results tallying sheets, but also solar panels, motorbikes, sat phones. It'll take them about a day to reach their destination of Basankusu.
Achille Bolekela is responsible for overseeing the whole operation in the area.
80% here will be transported along the Congo River by water, and that's not easy. We believe we can deliver all this in 1 week. We have just 1 week for all of the material to arrive at the last polling station. It must arrive before Friday.
The small village of Jombo is only 15 kilometers away, but getting there is a mission. The waterlogged dirt road crisscrosses the rainforest. Every single day, traders, students and others struggle to navigate the terrain. Some go by foot, others by bicycle. Joseph Alongea is a pineapple farmer. He and his wife Esther have 7 children. Only 3 can afford to go to school.
He's showing us one of his pineapple trees. This is a beautiful field, 3 hectares approximately of pineapples. Everything here was planted by Joseph himself. He works with a machete. That's pretty much it. He also owns a few goats, ducks, and there's about 3-4 ponds in the middle of the pineapple plantations.
Life is difficult here. There are no hospitals, poor roads, no medicine, and no one has any money.
He feels abandoned by his government, but he still wants to vote, he says.
It's our right to vote. If we don't vote, the country won't function well, and we will suffer further.
On the day that was meant to be voting day, we visited the village polling station. There was no electoral material in sight, no booth, no ballot boxes, no voter registry on the door. Jean-Pierre Ikembo is a teacher and the director of the voting centre.
We hear on the grapevine that the election material will arrive in the polling centres, but nothing has arrived yet.
Ikembo and many of the villagers are worried the material might never arrive. Some also think the vote could be rigged. In Jombo, 400 people are registered to vote, a tiny fraction of the 40 million nationwide. But this village is representative of thousands of others where the population wants to vote, but feel their fate is not in their hands.
Louise Douast reporting. Well, Louise is back in the capital, Kinshasa, now, and she's been telling me more about today's protests. Those took place in the city of Beni, where hundreds of people took to the streets, burning tyres and blocking roads.
Today, a transit centre was ransacked. That's where suspected Ebola cases wait for results. The health ministry told us that 21 people had fled during that incident. The angry mob was demonstrating following the decision by the Electoral Commission to postpone the vote in the city of Beni and in 3 other locations across the country.
And is the government saying that the reason for that postponement is because of the Ebola outbreak?
That's one of the reasons that they are mentioning. The other reason is insecurity in Beni, but also in one of the other cities where the vote is being postponed, in Yumbi in the west of the country. It's a bit of an odd decision because armed groups are operating in other parts of the country where the vote is about to take place on Sunday. But the Electoral Commission insists that they are allowed to postpone the votes in areas where there are what they describe exceptional circumstances. Opposition candidates have called this decision politically motivated because these 4 areas where the vote is being postponed are widely seen as opposition strongholds. One of the main opposition candidates, Martin Fayulu, held a press conference today and called for a general strike tomorrow. He's saying that this decision by the Electoral Commission is illegal and asking for the vote to take place nationwide on Sunday.
Have the authorities explained what will happen to the votes from people in those areas, given that presumably the new president will have been sworn in weeks before?
That's a very good question, and we do not have the answer for that at the moment. The Electoral Commission is saying that they are planning to hold a vote in those areas where the vote is currently being postponed, that they are planning to hold the vote in March. It's unclear if they're referring to the presidential election or the parliamentary election. The results for the presidential election are scheduled to be published on January 15th. So it's very unclear how they would be able to take into account votes that are cast at a later date.
And Louise, one other development, the EU representative to the DRC, he's being expelled. What more do we know?
For weeks now, the government in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been asking the European Union to go back on these sanctions. They replied to Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, the ruling party's candidate in these elections. The sanctions are for human rights violations. When Shadari was interior minister in the country, 14 other Congolese officials are also affected by these sanctions, which include a travel ban and asset freezes. These sanctions were renewed mid-December, so just very recently. And the government believes that these sanctions interfere with the electoral process. So that is why they are now effectively expelling the EU ambassador, Bart Ouvry, and have asked the EU to call him back in the next 48 hours.
The BBC's Louise Douast speaking to me from Kinshasa. Full coverage, of course, of Election Day on Sunday in the Democratic Republic of Congo. As the year draws to a close, we've commissioned a selection of BBC foreign correspondents to write an essay about the music that's been important to them during their working lives and travels. Today, it's the turn of the BBC's Alan Little. From 1991 to 95, he reported on the breakup of Yugoslavia, and in particular from Sarajevo, the besieged Bosnian capital.
You heard it quietly at first. The aching strain of it hung over the quiet streets of Sarajevo city centre. There was no road traffic now, no private cars or public transport, so the sounds of the city had been stilled by the war. And as you approached, it grew louder until you turned a corner and saw the striking incongruity of it. Vedran Smailovic, lead cellist in the Sarajevo Philharmonic Orchestra, sat in white tie and silk-fronted black tail coat in a plastic chair in a bombed and rubble-strewn pedestrian street. The previous day, 22 people queuing for bread had been killed there by a single mortar grenade that had dropped without warning from an empty blue sky, fired from the mountains that enclosed the city on all sides. He did it again and again each day for 22 days, one day for each of the dead, at precisely the time when and on the spot where the bomb had fallen. The moment was instantly iconic. Albinoni's Adagio in G minor rose above the city, punctuated by the crump of mortar fire and the rolling bass notes of distant machine guns. It lingered above the Serb Orthodox and Roman Catholic cathedrals and the 16th century Gazi Husrev Beg Mosque, all three located within a stone's throw of each other, symbolizing in architecture the multi-ethnic fabric that had characterized Sarajevo for centuries and was now being torn apart. When the English writer Rebecca West visited the city in the 1930s, she was glad, she wrote, that the spring had come late that year, because that had enabled her to see snow on the roof of a mosque, a sight that captured for her the intrinsic incongruity of Sarajevo itself, a city where Islam, the religion of the East, had adapted itself over generations to a particular European sensibility and form. Vedran's audacity was a rebuke to us all. The world looked at Sarajevo and saw only warring factions and seething hatreds. The city I saw was full of brave and blameless individuals, and in Vedran Smailovic I saw a need as visceral to the human soul as the need for food and shelter, the need for artistic expression. We are not beasts of the field, that cello was telling the world. We are educated urban people, and not just hungry mouths to be fed. A few months later I watched a column of 40,000 people emerge from a damp autumnal forest. They'd been walking for 2 days and 2 nights to escape a military onslaught. An old man stopped to speak to me, exhausted, filthy, bewildered. "Have you seen my wife?" he asked. "We got separated in the forest. I don't know whether she's made it." I asked him how old he was. 80, he said. Finally I said, "Do you mind if I ask, are you a Muslim or a Croat?" And his answer shames me even now as I hear in my mind's recollection of it his words echoed down the decades. "I am," he said, "a musician."
And that was the BBC's Alan Little with some of his recollections of the war in Bosnia and the siege of Sarajevo. The music, of course, Adagio in G minor by Albinoni. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Don't forget plenty more on all our top stories, including the elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo and, of course, our other top story, the war in Yemen. All the background and analysis at bbc.com/news. Do stay with us. Still more to come. A reminder of our top story today on NewsHour. A shaky ceasefire appears to be holding in Yemen's key port city of Hodeidah. Mark Lowcock's the UN's top humanitarian official. He's called the situation in Yemen the world's worst humanitarian disaster. And he told us earlier about one child in Yemen he can't forget.
I remember a little baby called Faisal, whose mother had been in the hospital in Aden with him for a few weeks, and every now and then he'd improve a bit and they'd take him home, and then he'd deteriorate again and they'd bring him back in, and that was happening 3 or 4 times. And what I'm aware of as I meet parents of children like that is, in a way, they're the lucky ones, because they're the ones who've got to the hospital. There are countless numbers, just like little Faisal, who we never see and whose stories we never hear, but who never make it.
One other headline: both houses of Congress in the US have adjourned without taking action to address the continuing government shutdown. This is NewsHour with James Menendez. Now, David Attenborough's latest landmark TV series, Dynasties, explores the plight of different families in the animal kingdom. In one episode, following a pride of lions, the film crew witnessed some of them being poisoned by cattle herders. They were trying to protect their livelihoods after some of their own animals had been killed. Well, the incident in Kenya illustrated the much wider problem of conservation when humans and wild animals share the same land. Our Africa correspondent Alistair Leithhead reports.
Whizzing. The legs are collapsed.
This was one of the lions shown on David Attenborough's recent Dynasties nature documentary, poisoned by cattle herders in the Masai Mara.
Today has been a very tough day for me. I was called to come and check on a lion that I treated some 3 days ago for suspected poisoning.
Vet Campaign Limo did what he could.
Doing a thorough examination, it was evident that this lion was on his way to death. So we had to take the very painful decision to euthanize this lion.
Dr. Shivani Bala is with Ewasu Lions.
Camels, donkeys, sheep, cows are often killed by lions. And understandably, when this happens, there's so much anger and resentment from the local communities because this is their life. And often lions are then shot, speared, or poisoned in retaliation.
Africa's population will double in the next 30 years. And that's only going to pile more pressure onto the conflict between humans and wildlife, whether it be lions or elephants. Maasai communities come in and out of the parks all the time with their cattle.
I'm standing just outside Amboseli National Park. It's a few kilometres to the gate down the road there. But there are no fences, so the animals can wander through the communities that join on to the park. And of course, they have, in this case, cattle. And a 10-year-old boy was tending to the cattle when he was attacked by a large bull elephant, and he was killed. Another boy with him ran back to the houses just a few hundred metres away and raised the alarm.
I met Ms. Timo, whose grandson Tepape died. He explained that his grandson and another boy were checking the fields close to the village when they were attacked by an elephant. Tepape was trampled to death, and then the community went out in pursuit of the elephants and killed 2 of them.
My name is Ian Douglas Hamilton, and I'm up in the Samburu National Reserve in the north of Kenya. I run Save the Elephants, and that's just what we try to do. We're looking after a large population of African elephants up in the north of Kenya. Of course, it's worrying that we currently have 1 billion people in Africa, and there will be 4 billion by the beginning of the next century. But our feeling is that by doing careful research work and getting to know local people, we can both know what the animal problems are and then how their needs can be reconciled with local people.
We went to a Maasai cultural village to see just how much of a competition for land there is. Chief Nangyu admitted cattle were sometimes illegally taken into the reserve.
We don't have enough grass here around. That's the reason why we take our cattle at night to go where the wild animal is.
And how many animals are killed by lions? How much of a problem is it for you?
From each and every night, from 5 to 10 cows killing by the wild animal, but we know that we are not allowed to kill of any wild animal at all.
That was Chief Nang Yu ending that report by the BBC's Alistair Leithhead. Now, Britain's Defence Secretary has added his voice to growing Western concerns about the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. Gavin Williamson told the Times newspaper today that he had grave concerns about the firm's involvement in upgrading the UK's mobile network, the rollout of 5G. Both the US and Australia have already restricted the use of Huawei technology in their new networks because of worries that the Chinese government may use the hardware to harvest data. Huawei's denied it poses any sort of threat. I've been speaking to cybersecurity expert Emily Taylor of the think tank Chatham House here in London. Are Gavin Williamson's concerns justified?
I think his remarks follow on from Alex Younger, the head of MI6's remarks a month or so ago, who also raised serious concerns about Chinese firms providing critical telecommunications infrastructure in this country. However, Huawei has always denied that it is linked to the Chinese government.
What is the equipment that it makes that it is causing most concern?
The concerns at the moment surround an emerging technology, 5G, which will be the new super fast mobile broadband. Now, that technology is not yet fixed, and there's a sort of standards race going on between Western companies and Chinese companies to establish intellectual property in the standard that will be adopted. If a company is able to get its version of the standard adopted, then it has all sorts of commercial advantages and also security advantages, because it alone will understand deeply how that technology has been built up and also potentially what its vulnerabilities may be.
If people in the West are worried about a company like Huawei, I mean, it would make sense, one would have thought, for countries just simply to use its own companies to do this stuff and to make sure that they're adequately resourced to provide the technology.
Well, that is one way of thinking, and countries such as the United States, for example, has had import bans on Chinese telecommunications equipment for some time. However, it's not that easy for any one country, even the most technologically advanced country, to provide all of its own equipment from domestically sourced partners.
And presumably the other point to make is that if China does want to spy on us for whatever reason, but if it's industrial espionage, it can do so in other ways.
The unfortunate truth is that our general level of cybersecurity internationally is not what it should be. And therefore, if you do want to do hacking, espionage or disruption, unfortunately, it's a lot easier than it should be already. There's no need for you to get in at the infrastructure level. However, if you are at the infrastructure level, it gives you a level of potential control and access to all traffic, all data that goes on those networks. So it is an extremely powerful position to be in, whether or not you choose to abuse that position.
That was Emily Taylor. That's it for this edition of NewsHour from me and the rest of the team. Thanks for being with us. Until the next time. Bye-bye.
NewsHour has been a download from the BBC. To discover more and our terms of use, visit bbc.com/podcasts.